It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited. Old friend joining us today.
Our audience is in for a great episode here today. We're featuring an industry leader in the automation and robotics technology space. So quick programming note, if you enjoyed the episode here today, be sure to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Okay. So today we are featuring none other than Jeff Cashman, Chief Operating Officer with GreyOrange. Jeff, how you doing?
Good, Scott. How you doing?
Doing, all things considered, we're doing all right, right?
Very
we're
good.
All getting through these times. Great to have you. It was, the last time Greg and I were out in person was the Modex at Modex Week, and that was the last time we caught up with you last, I believe.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
It's hard to believe it's been three months. Gosh. All right. So, and it's also not your first appearance on Supply Chain Now, so that's always neat to welcome back repeat guests. But for folks that may have missed that episode, what feels like 100 years ago,
Right.
Tell us about Jeff Cashman. Tell us about where you're from, and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Good to be with you, Greg. Always good to see you and be with you. Thanks for having me again, guys. Scott, I was born and raised up in Midwest, outside Chicago, Elk Grove Village, Illinois, and went to University of Illinois and in Champaign-Urbana. Graduated with a degree in economics. Interesting where I am now to those days back in as an econ major. But when I was growing up, middle-class family, basically working from the time we were 8 years old as a paper boy. Never forget that bike. I had two baskets in the back, riding with my dad's old bike, throwing the papers down the street. All the way until graduation. And as I was going through school at University of Illinois, my summer internships or summer jobs at that point, nobody ever called them internships. I was driving a forklift in a secondary steel plant. Elk Grove Village has a very large industrial park, and I was driving a forklift in this secondary steel plant. And then right before I graduated, I was working with a chain distributor. Like a chain distributor, and I was helping doing inventory counts of chain. So as I was growing up, that's how I went through school, paid for school, and then graduated and went to work right out of school with Anderson. At that point, it was Arthur Anderson, MICD, which became Anderson Consulting, which ultimately became Accenture.
So let me jump right in here, Jeff. So right before we talk more about your journey, you had the advantage, it sounds like in college, of being in manufacturing plants, distribution facilities. These are things that a lot of folks don't experience that so early in their career. That gave you a leg up in really understanding what those industries did and what global supply chain was, right?
Well, it really was. That secondary steel plant in particular, driving that forklift, a buddy of mine's dad's brother owned it and said, hey, they need some help. So I went and drove the forklift. But just understanding U.S. Steel was coming through, and the secondary steel was basically being pushed off to this small plant where they were basically shaving. So learned a ton about global supply chains, about the operations in as of themselves, and the people in the operation, right? That was the UN, right? We have folks from Mexico. We had folks from Poland. We had folks from all sorts of people around the world, and working side by side with them, shift by shift. It gave me a real appreciation for the global supply chain, and really working in operations. Yeah, for sure.
Esprit de corps, that camaraderie. The way I looked at it, and when I got out of the Air Force in 2002, and eventually found my way back into manufacturing. There was a lot of similarities there, and the teamwork and the united mission. I mean, there's something that is so unique to those production sites. So it's neat to hear of what you had experienced and really the advantage of experiencing so early in your career.
Yeah.
All right. So now you started to talk about your professional journey prior to GreyOrange.
Yeah.
So please tell us more.
Well, I graduated from university, and to your point, so I hopped into Arthur Anderson and Company. At that point, there were a bunch of consulting groups fundamentally just kicking up at that point. Coopers and Lybrand, and Arthur Anderson and KPG. They were all hiring kids out of college, basically that were going to go help, start deploying these massive systems, processes and systems. So I jumped in there, went to boot camp, which is Arthur Anderson's boot camp, the Green Books and all that stuff. And
back in Chicago, right? Was it back in Chicago then?
Yeah, in fact, I was based in Chicago, 33 West Monroe, but the training campus was out in St. Charles, Illinois, right?
Okay.
So, and they basically had bought an old Catholic university, and that's where they held their training program, right there on the Fox River in St. Charles, Illinois. So, great memories there. Basically, at that point, from a computer perspective, we'd go through computer programming classes, but we were using cards.
Okay. Punch cards.
Punch cards.
We talked about those the other day.
Oh my gosh. And one of the tricks, and you go through this, you do pull an all-nighter and you do these punch cards, and then you give them to your supervisor and they carry them in, and they spook everybody, because after that all-nighter, they're walking with your deck of cards and they drop them. Now it was a spoof. It was somebody else, but you're like, oh my God, that is, I'm going to get fired. It's all over. It never, but it was a very good experience.
What's interesting, a quick aside about punch cards. We just learned this, as Greg mentioned the other day, what prompted folks to figure out even punch cards and early computers is that it was taking the U.S. government 8 years to process census results, way back at the end of the 19th century. So even though punch cards are quite a bit in our rearview mirror now, at the time, as you know, it was revolutionary, and it allowed us to move faster, as crazy as it sounds today.
Unbelievable. And literally when I went out, I was on my first project. It was all COBOL programming at that point.
Okay.
Wow.
PICS, VC. So all of a sudden we were in the new world. We learned on the old, moved to the new. Went through, basically blocking and tackling projects with Anderson. But my first project happened my second project was in distribution, and it was on inventory management and warehouse control. It was with United Stationers up in Des Plaines, right?
No way.
Yeah. And we were implementing an inbound warehouse management, inbound warehouse management, inbound inventory control system. And Anderson had a product at that point called DCS Logistics, which is distribution control system, logistics, big mainframe software, order management, inventory, warehouse management stuff. And I was on the inventory side and I was on the warehouse side, and kind of going back to, the secondary steel plant and the chain distribution plant. I'm like, I kind of like this, I like seeing, to your point, the esprit de corps of people working together around a problem, the solve of the operation. And now we're bringing technology to it. And it was light years ahead of where they were to where we were bringing mainframes and big old sheets in of basically reports that run the operation. So that was my first taste of technology in a warehouse with United Stationers in 1988. And at that point, it clicked in that I would move into this DCS logistics product. So I became part of that team on the go-to-market side and really became a solutions consultant around DCS logistics. And for the next 2 years, that's what I did, walking into all these sites, understanding how we would deploy DCS logistics and help sell it. And then the team would hand off and deliver it. And then that lasted till 1990. And Yeah.
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt just for a second because just like your earlier career, you were having a taste of industry and production and manufacturing and distribution earlier than most. It sounds like to me that you were also getting a heavy dose of technology before most folks knew what business technology and certainly supply chain technology was, right?
Yeah, really great point, right? We were so siloed at that point. At that point, it was transportation and warehousing. They're very
right. Wasn't even called supply chain at that point, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Operations. So it's a really good point, Scott, because now the technology was really these advancements, and the buyers were the warehouse operator, but ultimately it was the CFO,
right,
and the CIO, which is interesting. So we kind of progress through the late 80s, and then Anderson, they'll never forget this call. 3 of us in a room, they say, hey, look, we need one of you guys to go to Japan. We need one of you guys to go to Europe. I'm married, my wife, Chris. We were pregnant with our first daughter at that point, and she was working at First Chicago. And I said, came back to Chris. I said, she was going to have to take time off. Hey, look, we go to Europe or Japan. Where would you like? Well, let's go to Europe. So I come back the following week, said, hey, look, we're super excited to go to Europe. He goes, great. We'll see you in Japan September 1st.
Somebody had already nabbed Europe, hadn't they?
They already nabbed Europe. We went to Japan. So Elise, our daughter, was born on July 29th. I started in Japan September 1st. So
wow.
We moved to Tokyo for the next 3 years, where we were basically doing the same DCS logistics now in Japan. Very different market, very different hierarchical distribution network. They had a fundamentally a distribution network of 7 layers called a CHOI, which basically kept everybody employed. If you think about it, there was very, very little unemployment because everybody's touching product through these 7 layers of distribution. So we were there in Japan from 1990 till 1993, but a couple of major things happened there at that point. One was in Japan, the big store law passed, because if you've been to Japan, a lot of little marts, a lot of little stores, and that's how the communities are formed and the culture really is. And the big store law was passed by Toys R Us entering into Japan. They wanted access, and they forced their big footprint. And then all the other Japanese large retailers said, we're going to do the same. But that fundamentally then blew up a massive distribution network because now these little marts were going away and it was going to the big store. It took years, decades to fundamentally evolve that way. But that was you talk a little bit about the eureka moment. You talk about the, that was it, right? A country, a distribution environment now turned upside down because of an event. And this event happened to be called the big store law.
So disruption before we called it disruption, really.
Fundamentally, yeah. And culturally. I mean, it was a massive cultural shift too, right?
So that eureka, you read my mind, because that's what I was going to ask you next. But if that was one of your bigger eureka moments, what were you thinking at the time that, the next 20 or 30 years, what were you thinking? Were you thinking at the time that was going to be, a big ripple and have a huge ripple effect, and we're going to see the same needs that sounds like this regulation opened up in Japan elsewhere in retail?
Well, it was, I wish I was that, good. I did. You saw the impact in Japan because there were protests. I mean, this was impacting millions of people that were going to be out of work, right? Ultimately out of work. They were protesting and so forth. So you saw the disruption, Greg, as you call it. I mean, this is real disruption at the heart and soul of this community. I took that experience, though, Scott, to your point, and when we came back to the States in '94, then I got it right. Now the big stores were absolutely in place. Supply chains were forming. The Walmarts were moving. The Toys R Us were moving.
Right.
This linear supply chain now was starting to begin. Massive manufacturing at that point in the 80s, 90s was Japan, right?
Right.
China not really yet online. and starting to see now this massive movement of manufacturing on the water, distribution, stores, and hence the linear, supply chain began, right? And at that point with Anderson Consulting at that point back here, I then came back and worked on a very, very large project with a very large brand out of Portland, Oregon, that was global in nature and was dealing with exactly that. Where am I going to put manufacturing, fundamentally cross-docking it, leveraging the Philippines and rifling them into the States? Already at that point, how can we start to think about flow and movement of goods at a velocity that fundamentally met the consumer's needs? And in this instance, capture a market, right? Yep. So that was where I basically ended my time with Anderson Consulting at that point in '97, and then came over to the dark side or onto the software side, the tech side, with a company at that point called McHugh Freeman.
Okay.
McHugh Freeman was part of a very large automation company. So you'll see this go full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Called Pinnacle Automation. And they had bought Bushman, all the conveyors, and a bunch of other guys. And McHugh Freeman was kind of their software underneath it, built on a digital or a DEC platform, if we can say that these days. But there was a company, a great technology called Digital back in the day. And fundamentally was a warehouse management system. And there were a couple others out there at that point. There was a company out of Dallas called Dallas Systems that was doing a ton of work in grocery.
Yep.
There was a company here in Atlanta called Manhattan Associates that were just getting going in the 90s. And then McHugh Freeman. And big customers, Procter & Gamble and big P&G, big CPG guys. I was there for a couple of years. We basically carved McHugh Freeman out to become a separate entity.
And you're focusing on providing automation solutions, right?
Yeah,
to these big brands, right?
Yeah, warehouse management system fundamentally. And they were getting into retail, big retailers they were working with, and CPG customers. And we basically raised $50 million from a venture capital firm, carved it out as a separate entity in 1998. And I left at the end of 99, but that company became Red Prairie, that became JDA, that's now part of Blue Yonder.
Gotcha.
And during that period of time, we bought a labor management system at that point called Gagnon and Associates, based out of Minneapolis, and put the two together. So now you've got warehouse management, labor management coming together. And we had also purchased a company called Wesley Transportation Management Systems. Mm-hmm. So here you've got this McHugh software, pulling together warehouse management, transportation with Wesley, and then also labor management, Gagnon, coming together with what we called at that point a logistics execution system, LES. No more WMS, no more TMS. We're integrating them.
More holistic.
We were bringing it together to drive synergies between the warehouse and transportation, inbound, outbound.
So Jeff, if I could pause for a second, because Greg, I'd love to, as Jeff was describing a story, and we've got just a little bit more to go before GreyOrange enters the picture. But what stands out the most from Jeff's experience, and especially him being on the front line of these big these disruptions, as you called it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've known a little bit about Jeff's history for a few years. We're not old friends; we're young friends that we
forever
from an old time ago. So, what really stands out is that what you experienced, Jeff, was the start of technology when it was essentially custom every single time it was built. Mm-hmm. And then you progressed into this progression of and transformation of accumulations of technology that instead of standing in silos, which you said, right? We're very siloed at that time.
Right.
Instead of standing in silos, you were starting to accumulate TMS and WMS and LMS and make a suite of products that started to solve the problem rather than attack the individual issues. And that to me is what leaps out at me when you tell this story. Also, the other thing that leaps out at me is I'm curious, how is your Japanese these days?
Yeah, right. I can order a beer and get in a taxi cab, and that's about
Hey,
it.
That's good.
That's heads and shoulders above
In
many.
any language, you need to know how to order a beer, identify that your friend will pay, know where the bathroom is, and get in a taxi.
All right. So back to your story, Jeff, where
Yeah.
you were implementing these logistics execution systems, these LES, these holistic packages, suites, as Greg was calling it. What's the big roles that come next just prior to GreyOrange?
Yeah, so then we go through and do a startup here in Atlanta called Velocity, supply chain integration, visibility to execution, basically planning to execution platform. That was during the dot-com bubbles, ran hard and fast for that one, acquired 5 companies, pulled them together. After that, went over to a company here in Atlanta called Mapix, which is a supply chain, but much more manufacturing, SMB side of the house, and MRP side. Basically running at that point, ran the international operations piece of the business. And then I moved on to Manhattan Associates and was at Manhattan Associates for 13 years. So Anderson Consulting, 13, to Manhattan Associates for 13. And at that point, with Manhattan, really started to understand now customers, solving the problem, the value proposition, how we could start to leverage technology further into these functions of now order management, inventory management, warehouse management, transportation. So that's where, if I think about all those roles, I really learned through that process about how we're going to create a platform, with that platform to create fundamentally a value proposition that is 10x what solving a problem is versus looking at the solution and how we're going to think about deploying that solution in this platform way. And then my last turn was just briefly before GreyOrange, was with a small company here in Atlanta called Allied Commerce. And at Allied Commerce, we were fundamentally e-commerce distribution. And worked with a lot of small manufacturers that needed an e-commerce presence and then delivery. So it was a third-party logistics provider as well. Really learned a lot about now the operations side of the house versus just the technology.
Right.
And going back to the roots, my roots where we were operating in DCs and manufacturing plants, and fundamentally putting my feet on the ground of how we're going to now optimize and run this distribution center. Yep. Before that, I moved over to GreyOrange.
It's interesting that you went from kind of a physical environment to a virtual or technological environment, and then back, and now at GreyOrange, here you are in a physical environment solution with a ton of technology backing and driving it, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about what
Greg, one more. Let me butt one more time in, because I've got one question for Jeff. I drove a forklift years ago, and I still miss it to this day. Do you miss driving that forklift back from that steel plant years ago?
So 2 things about that forklift. The first time I drove that forklift and I picked up that secondary steel roll, I went over. I got tipped right over. I had it too far up on too far out of the tip.
That's tough.
So I learned a lot.
So that's a no. All right, Greg. Sorry, I had to ask you.
I didn't even realize that we all have forklifts in our history, because my first quote unquote supply chain job was working at a Kmart store, bringing the oil into the main store, into the automotive department from the automotive service center. And because I was only 16 when I started, I was doing that on a hand cart.
Right.
And eventually I got the right to drive a forklift. So we've all had that experience. And it is one of the greatest experiences.
It is really good.
Yep.
Learn a lot.
Bartender, top on my list, I'd have to say, but second is forklift driver. So anyway, you did get to experience a lot of physical aspects and operational, as you said, operational aspects of supply chain, but also the technology. And now you're combining the two to create a solution that actually deploys vehicles, if you will, right, to do some of the things that humans have done in the past. So tell us a little bit about GreyOrange, what the company does.
Yeah. So GreyOrange is a robotics company, fundamentally focused on distribution and primarily in retail, right? That's our target markets. But what's really unique about this, and you know, you take my story and apply it here, it's all about that software integrated to these robots, right? Because over the years, we've seen the interfaces to all sorts of agents, whether it be robots or ASRS or any type of automation. But here it's integrated to this robot. So the robots learn from the software learns from the software learns from the robots, all in real time.
Yeah.
And you know, as I sit back and I think about why, you know, I've been asked several times, why did I take this job, right? And there's this holy grail ever since in working in the operations, the idea of getting to real-time optimization on the floor is where it happens, fundamentally bringing planning and execution together. That's the holy grail. And the technologies that we've been talking about, and I'm not a technologist, but I've been working around them for 100 years. The reality is the technology's never been there, right? But now with this very unique technology, this platform we're leveraging, we call it Gray Matter, our software built on this very powerful technology integrated into these robots, is what brought my attention to GreyOrange, how they're solving this problem, and then the application of that across industries. And we happen to be focused on retail. And when I think about the value prop of GreyOrange, we started in 2011 in India. Akash Gupta is our CTO and Samay Kohli is our CEO, and they studied in university robotics. And I mean, the humanoid type robotics. I mean, and they won all sorts of awards, and they got a lot of attention in India about these, you know, fascinating and very technologically advanced robots. And as they started to win these awards, they said, okay, so what is the business problem we want to go solve? And they focused on supply chain. And so in 2011, that's kind of what they did. They said, okay, let's go take this and go focus on sortation, get some software integration around it, then get the robots in, and take that journey through 2014, 2015. They've done very, very well with some very large customers, e-commerce platforms in India, very well. And they decide to move out of India and land first in Japan. And in Japan, land 4 very, very large customers, deploying our set of our robots, what we call Ranger GTP, so it's goods to person. And we also have another solution of a Ranger mobile sort, which is a sortation robotics. But at this point, it's goods to person that we're solving the problem for, and then that's the deployment in Japan. From Japan, then they move to Europe. And they land very, very large customers in Europe. And then about 2017, 18, they land here in North America, and they land a very large customer, public statement was XPO. And XPO basically created a very strategic partnership with GreyOrange about moving our GTP robots into their ecosystem and their customers, and fundamentally creating a massive differentiation against any other 3PL. We have about 600 people globally. Majority of our team is in India, but we have folks in Japan, operations here in North America, here in Atlanta, it's Roswell, and then also in Europe. And so that's who we are. To date, we have a little over 4,000 robots deployed. So when you think about scale, you think about maturity in this market. We have been in this market for a long time, been solving these problems for a long time, and at scale. These are generating operational value out of the chute. We don't do a lot of proof of concepts. We don't, because the way you demonstrate value is by putting them into the operation,
deploying them, yeah,
generating the value. And that's what we've done and been very, very successful along the way with our customers.
So it's interesting. I've had the opportunity to follow you guys even before you were there, Jeff. I was associated with a company that installed robotics in distribution centers and did some I think they did some preliminary work with your team a few years ago, and it was really impressive what the business problem that you're attacking, and that you're giving companies an alternative to the established fulfillment methodologies out there, right? So, I sort of have created this category of companies I call ABA, anyone but Amazon, right? And part of the issue for companies that are currently tethered to the big river is that they don't know where to go. They don't know what their options are. They don't know how to deploy other ways, and solutions like yours, solutions like XPOs and others, give them the full ability to do exactly what is being done for them today, but with fewer tethers and less threat from marketplace intervention and that sort of thing. So I really applaud what you all are doing to enable that. And that is a big portion of your target, is not just bricks and mortar retailers, but also e-commerce or people who are crossing both areas, right?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And Greg, to that point, when you think about these retailers and large brands, small brands, however you want to think about it, these brands are for you and I as consumers are really, really important. How they get to us is now as important, right? The Amazon folks have set the standard, the bar, at an incredibly high level of service. And if I'm not serviced that way by a product I may love, but Amazon gets it to me a different product at at the service level I expect, I'm at risk of the brand I was at
right out of the gate.
I'm at risk, right? So they have to find a way to meet and or exceed that service level. And given the challenges that we have today in the market, and this is a pre-COVID statement, and I'll talk COVID, but fundamentally, why would people think about a solution like GreyOrange, right? With this very powerful software, integrated robotics, is we're running out of people, right? This is not only this is a statement, a global statement in Japan and Europe and here in North America, but we're fundamentally running out of people from who wants to work in a distribution center in August, with a couple hundred people around you. So we're running out of people. That was kind of the one objective. So what are we going to do to replace those people, become more efficient in the distribution center, in the fulfillment center? How are we going to become more efficient? So we're running out of people. We're running out of space because of these consumer demands that we're putting on the network, meaning that supply chain network, distribution network, fulfillment network. We've got to move closer and closer to where you and I are. These inventory nodes are going to be closer to where we're at. So we've got to go get space. That's more expensive. How can I use my current space in a more efficient way? Think micro fulfillment. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the third piece is we're running out of time. And what I mean by running out of time is those shipping windows are getting more and more compressed.
Yep.
And if I miss the window, I miss the service, and then the brand has lost the promise to you and I as the consumer. So we're running out of people, we're running out of space, and we're running out of time. That was fundamentally the mantra coming into the business, right? And the value prop is very powerful on how we're going to fundamentally reduce the dependency on labor. You don't take labor away completely because it's very much integrated with labor,
right?
But reduce the dependency on labor, especially with these retailers and brands dealing with these massive peak seasons. One of our customers that we're dealing with at peak. They have non-peak. They have about 1,000 people. At peak, they have 4,000 people. They have to bust people in to have this work, if they could even find them.
Right. And that's getting exceedingly hard to do, and wages are going up. And at the same time, the workforce that wants to do physical work is getting smaller by 10,000 individuals a day, right? Absolutely. As the baby boomers exit the workforce, the younger generations want to do technical and analytical work. And I think the other thing that what you all do, Jeff, that particularly adds value is it not only elevates what humans do in that, they still get their esprit de corps, but now they're doing a more elevated, what humans are more equipped to do. Robots are doing what robots are more equipped to do. And it creates a safety factor in the facility as well, because your robots are programmed not to collide into one another, right? And they are very active. They're never looking the other way, right? And accidentally run into things. Plus, they do those jobs that are repetitive and mundane and straining, and you don't have the physical injury risk that a human being has. And I just think that elevates everyone's existence in a distribution center when you do that.
It does. I think that safety piece, now as you look at where we are in COVID, and what's really interesting in this COVID times is as we hit that February, March timeframe, things started to kind of pause, stop, felt a little bit like end of 07 going into 08, right? And
except everyone was already at home at this time, right?
That's exactly right. And so at that point, that freeze was very interesting to watch who accelerated through it, meaning who had the balance sheet, who was ready for it. Not COVID, but this shift in demand.
Yep.
Who was ready for it and who wasn't, right? And
basically so the extra peak season.
Extra peak season, right? And we're fundamentally
or trough season, depending on the business and the product you're talking about as well, right?
That's true as well. But you kind of move to this haves and have-nots, right? When we've always talked about them for as long as I've been in the business, who's doing it, who doesn't do it, who has it, who doesn't have it.
Yep.
This just put a stark reality about the haves and the have-not. Who has the right product at the right time? Who has the right infrastructure to service the customers with the right product at the right time?
Right.
All of these scenarios, use cases start to play out, and you can clearly see who's been thinking about this, who's ahead of it, and who's not, right? So you go through this period of time in post-COVID, and what's even more interesting in this very uncertain time is I need more people. We have 42 million, 43 million with 1.5 million now again. 43 million people unemployed. Still, people aren't showing up to work. Now, a lot of reasons for that. There's a fear and a very real fear of COVID. What does it look like? How's it going to impact me? Right now with the government packages and unemployment in the market, the reality is the distribution workers, the associates, are making 166% more than their hourly wage. So why work? Yeah. So that'll end. It should end, and it'll evolve back, and people will come back to work. But there's still this reality for a period of time of safety of what does this distribution center look like? And with this massive shift to e-commerce.
Yeah.
E-commerce in the last 6 months, we're not done with the year, 45% growth in e-commerce. When we were seeing 8 to 10% growth per year, 45% growth year to date, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't hit peak.
Yeah.
Technical peak.
Right.
Well, and now we're even less equipped to handle peak, because with physical distancing requirements, for even those people that do come back, you can't create the same capacity because of the physical distancing of humans. You'll have to augment. So I think COVID really becomes an accelerant for automation and robotics in fulfillment and distribution.
Yep. I agree. And quite frankly, we're inherently built to be, social distance, right? Yep. Our pickers, our picking stations are literally 6+ feet apart, right? Robots are robots.
Right.
Yeah.
We're built in with that safety net from a COVID and a control perspective that allows for our customers to deploy these solutions in a way that's safe and efficient for their associates.
All right, I've got 22 pages of notes. I can't keep up with both of y'all, but Jeff, what in a short span we've already been, if that doesn't give you a great sense of what's taking place in e-commerce and in retail, I mean, folks are getting their money's worth today for sure. You've already addressed as we shift gears a bit, and we're going to start moving a little more broadly with the conversation. You've already addressed, you've been reading my mind, this next question, because you've already touched on a lot of the reasons for automation and robotics in industry. But before Greg really broadens it up, give us, what do you think in the world of automation and robotics, what is the one key development that you've recently observed, or something maybe we should keep our finger or our eyes on?
Yeah, what is becoming apparent over the last year, and even my time with Manhattan Associates, what is becoming apparent is that the technologies of today, warehouse management systems and automation, living in silos, doesn't work anymore. It can't work anymore. If in fact we're going to address the topics we've already talked about,
Right.
Being able to fulfill that customer need, doing it in a safe and effective way, COVID or no COVID,
Yep.
Being able to drive efficiency and accuracy, and in a way that addresses, I'm not going to have enough people, I'm running out of space, and I'm running out of time. I need to be able to drive that efficiency. So the technologies of the past and the recent past is solid technology, but is not going to address the next 5 to 10 years. And this paradigm of integrated software and robotics is the thing that's got me. Well, I'm super excited about it, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit of the holy grail of planning and execution coming together in fulfillment.
Right.
And that to me is the thing that I'm seeing. And drilling a sorter to a floor, or drilling more conveyor to the floor, only limits my space, limits
Right.
my flexibility, limits my ability to scale.
That's right.
And I believe those days are going to go. It's beginning of, we're in the early innings here for sure. It's a long game.
It's like the faster you can go, the faster you can go. It's like riding a horse. The more a horse runs, the faster it wants to run, the longer it wants to run. And it's exciting to hear you talk about the constant improvement between the software and the robotics themselves, and just the constant learning environment.
Right.
And you're able to move faster and faster for the customer. Hey, one other comment before I get Greg back involved, and he's going to go a little bit more broader. Yeah, as I was checking out doing my homework on GreyOrange earlier, at the very top of your website, it kind of parallels an earlier conversation we had way back when, which I wish I'd have recorded, quite frankly, between you and Terry and Greg and some others. It would have been a great podcast. But nevertheless, your attention and your company's attention and appreciation and recognition of the workforce in these fulfillment centers and distribution centers and warehouses. There are so many great people that have been on the front lines throughout this pandemic and then some. And just clearly, it's part of y'all's culture to appreciate and love on those folks. And it is so needed. Not only is the recognition needed, but protecting these folks that are meeting, between that and all the technology and robotics, are meeting that 45% growth, and making it easier for not just Americans, but consumers around the world to navigate through these challenging times. So kudos to you and your organization for recognizing and clearly making that a priority.
Thank you, Scott. It's real, right? Your point is real. We at GreyOrange have personally felt that, right? We've got folks out on the front lines, and we've we've had some personal loss with COVID in our family, our GreyOrange family, with folks that are on the front line. That's what they do, right? So it's real. And thank you for bringing that up.
You bet. All right. So, Greg, on
Yeah.
a much brighter note, we're going to kind of go a little more broader globally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm almost afraid to ask, Jeff. You've seen so much change. You've seen so much evolve. I know you have a vision of what the future could be and what's important now, but let's go a little bit more broad. Let's tune into your crystal ball a little bit, or anything that's got your attention right now. What really are you seeing that, you know, either inspires or concerns or ignites you in terms of technology or supply chain, or really any topic today?
Well, supply chain, because it's who I am. This is where I spent my career, and my passion is there, and in warehouse and in fulfillment, and what has been igniting my interest, what has really inspired me. My career has been recreated a couple different times, and it's all been around you and I as consumers, and finally the supply chain is aligned with the pull versus the push, right? And I've you've been in that business forever, Greg. When we start and Bezos figured it out, and he put a bunch of big barriers in the way for us to to compete with that. But fundamentally, it's in the right place now. How everybody basically aligns around that, gets aligned around that. It's no longer linear. It's 1,000 points of light about how we're going to service you and I as a consumer. As we start to recreate this new distribution network, all these different inventory nodes, whether it be a store, whether it be a kiosk, whether it be a large regional distribution center, fulfillment center, that network, as it evolves from where it was, and was is 6 months ago, was a
right, or less,
or to where it's going. Is all about that inventory being a place where it's going to be positioned to service the customer in a way that creates that trust between the brand and that consumer. Amazon's done, people are coming, and it's going to happen. And to do that, you don't have the people to get it done. And so therefore, I'm back onto the message of GreyOrange and what we're doing, and the power of this software integrated to drive these technologies, which is, we call them agents, a robot, a conveyor, a sorter, how we want to basically manage and orchestrate agents within a fulfillment center, within a node. We have conversations going on right now, and we got really smart people at GreyOrange, and they basically are saying we could stand up in 6,500 square feet. Give me a store opening. We could pump out 5,000 to 10,000 units a day. Let's go put it in 6,500 square feet and get something up and running quick. Just that sort of innovation, that sort of push on fulfillment of the demand to achieve what the brand wants to achieve is something that I'm just super excited about. And long ago, we used to drill stuff to the floor, and I just think that's not gonna be the way 5 years from now. We're in a very, very different mode, very different mindset. When I started GreyOrange, I've had the opportunity to work with some great supply chain experts, and they're now chief supply chain officers. And back when I started, first 2 months, I went and chatted with them. I said, so what do you think about what I'm doing? And does this make sense? And 9 out of the 15, this is a mandate. Over the next 5 years, as we redesign our distribution network, this is a mandate. Now, it's robots, it's us, it's others, but it's a mandate that it's got to be, we've got to change. And to me, that is telling. Now with COVID, it's accelerated. So that's kind of what I see.
Well, I mean, flexibility is key in any retail environment. It was changing dramatically, even at 8 to 10% of a shift towards e-commerce. Now it's changing even more rapidly, and it will peak and then fall back to whatever growth rate we wind up settling at, right? And that requires its own flexibility. Day to day, it can require flexibility in terms of, hey, today is a big day. It's the last day of the month. You know, I know a little bit about distribution. Last day of the month, everybody's getting paid. Cigarettes and beer are going to sell like crazy, right? It's the 5th day of the month, whatever's happening that day, that, you know, it's Thursday, it's Tuesday, whatever is happening. And because with robotics and without the boundaries of those agents, those entities stuck to the floor, you can literally reconfigure a distribution center or a store or a fulfillment center day in and day out, and even intraday based on the volume of the types of products that's being produced throughout the day.
And it's all aligned to demand, and it's all aligned to the pull versus the push.
Yeah. We got to remember supply chain. This is critical for our revolution in terms of supply chain. We have to remember that the supply chain begins and ends with the consumer.
Absolutely right.
Yep. And of course, those are beautiful transformations, and it's great to see the industry move that way, because that's going to help us tackle a number of other issues. And we were talking earlier today, circular economy and sustainability. Well, if we're really demand driven rather than push all this stuff out, we've got less waste and much other things to deal with. So I tell you, Jeff, I wish we had about 5 hours with you. Because 1 hour does not do you justice. It really doesn't. I mean, it's clear to me, Greg, at least, that not only is he a walking Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedia about all things supply chain, but he's so passionate about it. I mean, he loves this stuff. I mean, and it jumps out of the video.
It's interesting to hear you, Jeff, say you work with a bunch of really smart people. I just think that's really of course you do, right? But I think you've got to count yourself among those, not just smart, but also not experienced, right? And introspective, because you've captured a lot of this. You went all the way back to your paper route, and I've only ever heard one other person, Chris Gaffney, right?
Yeah.
From Coca-Cola, who went all the way back to the learnings that he had from his paper route and how that helped teach him supply chain.
Right.
So that kind of introspect is really, really valuable. And I bet you're going to have a lot of people wanting to get a hold of you. So let's go to the toughest question of the day. How can people reach you, or how can they reach GreyOrange?
So GreyOrange, for sure. It's head to the website, right? So it's GreyOrange.com, all one word, .com.
Gray with an E. GreyOrange.
That's right. That's a good point. Right. That's right. And I'd recommend going there and reach out that way. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly at jeff.c@greyorange.com. Would love to be a part of the conversation. There's so many folks. What I'm also finding is these use cases just keep changing. How can we use these now? So I'm sure that I hope this conversation has sparked some interest of, well, what about this? Because that's kind of where we are, early innings, the ability to start to define what these use cases are for this brand new technology that's going to change fulfillment of the future.
Yeah. That's great stuff.
So, Jeff, we hate to wrap up, but we'll have to bring you back for a second installment soon enough. We've been chatting with Jeff Cashman, Chief Operating Officer with GreyOrange. Jeff, thanks so much for your time.
Scott and Greg, it's always great to chat with you, and I look forward to listening more to you and seeing you soon.
Absolutely. All right. So, Jeff, don't go anywhere. We're going to wrap up here at this point. Greg, what, as promised, what a great conversation. Huh?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, talking about the inherent knowledge there, the ability to introspect on it and evolve it into from a physical to a technological and then a combined environment, and to see the future that way. We need more people in supply chain that have that kind of capability. And that's the message here, I think, that comes through loud and clear, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
We want leaders like Jeff, like you, Jeff.
Great
Talk
point.
about him like he's not here, like you, Jeff, in supply chain.
Well, great stuff. To our audience, thanks for tuning in here today. Be sure to check out our June 25th webinar on ERP best practices in the post-pandemic environment, and in particular, join us on July 15th as we have a very frank conversation on race in industry. And we've got a great panel. We're going to have a global interactive audience that are going to weigh in and share their insights and experiences. And we encourage you to join us for that. You can check out all of that stuff, as well as our podcasts or live streams, you name it, at supplychainnowradio.com. On behalf of our entire team, including Greg White, Scott Luton, wish you a wonderful week ahead. Hey, do the right thing, give forward, and be the change. We'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.